Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Gemology the Schmucks. My name is Peter Nelson, and I'm here to guide you in everything you need to know about gemstones. Today, what I would like to do is do a little recap of the lessons learned and remembered while cutting this piece of green corundum, which is featured in a video over here. I was having fun doing cinematic things, and so I decided now would be the good time to actually talk about it so we didn't have a video that was a half hour long. So this piece of synthetic corundum was, as promised, torturous to cut, and I learned, or remembered, a great deal of things. And those I would like to share with you. So where to start? I mean, jeepers. Cutting synthetic corundum is actually not that difficult, or so it seems while you're cutting it, until you get to the polishing stage. Now, the first thing that I would like to say is that my new favorite setup when cutting synthetic corundum is you can hash out the original shape using a very coarse grit, but then you're going to want to quickly switch over to finer and finer grits. So the magic ingredient of secret ingredient soup that I found was, well, hold on, let me show you. Once I got the original facets done, I switched over to using a twin trouble combo right here. We've got the 600 sintered lap, and we've got a 600 diamond topper lap. Now technically these are the same grit, but they don't cut the same way. 600 sintered is a delight for getting a nice smooth finish on most facets, unless you run into directional hardness, or sometimes I'm also told that synthetic corundum can have work hardening a lot, like metals. I don't understand that, so we'll just talk about directional hardness a little bit later. But first off, these two right here. Now, why is it that I don't use just straight up the 600 sintered lap? If it's so wonderful. Because it is. It's wonderful, and it creates a nice, smooth facet with a very fine, near pre-polish sort of texture, which makes it a lot easier to polish from this type of surface. But I still need to use the 600 topper because this cuts much more aggressively. There are times where I still need to continue to bring the facet down to get close to perfect meet points. But this leaves such an egregious surface that when I go to polishing, in order to polish out all of the marks that this leaves, I have to spend so much more time. And frankly, that's time that I'm not willing to spend, especially on the likes of synthetic, you were thusly named. Anyhow. So I do most of my cutting to get very close to the meet points with this guy right here to move it along quickly, and then I switch over to faceting on the sintered lap. Now, this is an 8-inch sintered, this is a 6-inch topper. When you put them together, it leaves a nice outer ring here. So I can cut on the inner surface and go in and get that final smooth surface on the outside. I'm sure that there's going to be some experienced cutter that's going to say what I'm doing right now is evil and I should be punished for it, putting two different laps together. But you know, until I actually start to see evidence that what I'm doing is wrong, well, I'm going to continue in my wickedness. So there. That's it for the cutting side. For the polishing side, there were many more issues, because there always are with synthetic corundum. Now, as with most of the other gemstones that I polish, I'm using a bat lap, which is a strange alloy that I don't know how to explain that's based on tin, to my understanding. Many of you who are already in cutting will have heard of and may even frequently use the bat lap. I use it for pretty much everything. I use it because it has worked for me, and maybe once I start to broaden outside of the 3 or 4 major types of stones that I've been cutting, maybe I'll find a need for other laps. But at the moment, it's dependable, and I like dependable. But that's not a surprise. So on the bat lap, I've got 2 bands, as suggested by Justin K. Prim in his course, Faceting Apprentice. If you want to learn more about that, go to facetingapprentice.com. That's how I've been learning how to cut. And I talked about that in another video. But back to the corundum. What I'm actually doing with the bat lap that I found is that there are still, even after using the 600 sintered, substantial gouges left in the stone. And I don't know if that's because of the grit or if that's because of something that's called the orange peel effect. If you noticed in the other video, if you watched it, which you should, when I start to polish certain facets, you'll see that there are things that look like small vacancies in the surface. It's pockmarked. So that could be the orange peel effect that everyone talks about, where the crystal kind of breaks away in an ununiform pattern. Or it could also be bubbles that are trapped in the lattice of the stone while it was being produced. That's very common inclusion for flame fusion synthetics, whether we're talking about spinel or corundum, etc. But if it's not orange peel and if it's not bubbles, then it could just be residual abrasion from the lap. Whichever it is, the thing that I found that worked is that this stone is super, super thirsty, and you need to apply more slurry to the problem. Now, when you go overboard with the diamond slurry, which is this stuff that you may have seen in the video, it's diamond powder suspended in oil. In stones like goshenite, if you use too much, it won't polish. It will just continually keep scratching and providing suffering for you. Life is full of suffering, we don't need more. But with synthetic corundum, maybe there's some sort of weird karmic imbalance where it's like, well, okay, there's enough suffering here, so add more slurry and the problems will go away. Well, either way, it worked for me. So, especially on the pre-polish stage, use more slurry than you think might be reasonable, because that will help move the facet along, keep the facet nice and flat, and provide you a good launching point to go into that final polish, which will be a lot faster now since you have been pretty aggressive with the pre-polish. The two bands that I'm using, I believe, are 8,000 grit and 60,000 grit. So that's like from here to here. Most of the commercial polish on stones in the gemstone market are at about 14,000 right here. So I guess the jump from 8,000 to 60,000 really isn't so bad. We still end up with that high polish, and in a lot shorter time than it would have taken otherwise. This stone still took me a few days. Of course, I'm not working all day, but anyway. Earlier, I mentioned something called directional hardness. And basically what that is on the orientation of a crystal, there are certain faces that may be harder, categorically, than other faces. In certain gemstones like kyanite, it's very pronounced, where one face may be 4 or 5 and one face might be 7. So if you're trying to scratch the stone, it'll show up much more evidently on the 4 side, obviously, and the 7 will be much harder to scratch. That particularly shows itself off in cutting the gemstone because it will be much harder to polish the softer side because the scratches will just keep showing up. Now, synthetic corundum has this much less pronounced than kyanite, but it still does have that, and it shows itself up much more in certain faceting patterns than others. So if you have long, flat facets and they manage to get lined up with the wrong direction in the crystal, it may make your life a living heck. Scratches, scratches, orange peel. But enough of problems, what's the solution? The solution, just like I was talking about a moment ago, is more slurry. Apply slurry to the problem. Because as those irregularities in the surface of the stone get smaller and smaller, it will be much easier to go to that final polish, and hopefully it'll just go away on its own. So use more slurry. And the last lesson that I learned, which I will briefly touch on because there's another video specifically on this, is depth percentage. Just because you have a boule that can give you a nice big face does not mean that you have enough depth to create a stone that does not have window. When you're cutting synthetic corundum, think about what you want to prioritize. Frankly, if you're cutting synthetic stone, it should be perfect. I didn't make this one perfect because I thought it was more interesting with a story. I don't like synthetics. Does the world really need another piece of perfect synthetic? And the answer is, if you're selling it, yes. But this one's mine. So for now, that's my thoughts on synthetic corundum. If you've got any questions, please head over to gemshepherd.com, where you can contact me directly. You can also read blogs about investing in gemstones. Otherwise, please hit that like button, that subscribe button if you haven't already. Tell all your friends about me. Until next time, bye-bye.